But really, what kick-started this calling on my life, this full-on pursuit to do ministry like this full-time, really came from my experience in the Army and my first deployment to Afghanistan. Worship for me began I think at a really young age. This pursuit to fulfill the calling of ministry on my life, and I remember growing up. I grew up in a pastor's home. My dad was he was a pastor and then joined the Army to become a chaplain. But I was always drawn to being a part of the whole worship service experience, and then just learning how to be a part of that more. So as a child, my mom saw that interest, got me involved, and I was always volunteering to be a part of the choir. Signed me up for several vocal lessons and things like that, and I kind of did that for a little bit until I was a teenager, and learned how to play guitar when I was 14. Got involved with youth ministry and leading youth worship, and then that led to more opportunities to lead worship as a teenager and ultimately in college. But really, what kick-started this calling on my life, this full-on pursuit to do ministry like this full-time, really came from my experience in the Army and my first deployment to Afghanistan. So I've been in the Army for about 9 years now. And I've been to Afghanistan twice. My first deployment was to Afghanistan in 2010 to 2012, a total of 13 months, and some of the best and worst times of my life. But in that experience, really encountered God in a way I'd never experienced before, and learned a lot about myself through that whole experience. So I'll begin by saying what may or may not be obvious, but that period of time in Afghanistan was particularly troublesome. We were at the height of the surge, and I was placed on in an outpost that was particularly volatile, and we encountered the enemy almost daily. And I actually took this is the Bible I took with me on that deployment, and every time we got engaged or we were close to having casualties, or I myself felt like I'd come close to losing my life, I made a recording of it, and I'll just kind of show you that. And that was the period of 13 months. And I just did that to remind myself that God was looking out for me. He was safeguarding me, and I owed him something. I felt like I needed to, and really what it was is a calling to worship him for it. And anyway, at the beginning of my deployment, one of my first encounters with the Taliban that we were fighting, I'd never experienced that kind of trauma before. And it was in the evening, and they were close. Several rockets had been fired. We had lost a soldier earlier in the day, and I was a part of the recovery team. And without getting too graphic, blood had just filled the streets where we were at, and it was an emotional moment because we knew this guy on an intimate level. He was one of my soldiers. And then the fighting continued, sporadic fire throughout the night, and we received reports that the Taliban was going to attempt to overrun us. Well, nothing happened for about an hour, and everybody started to, go rest for a little bit. And I went back to my quarters to go rest because it had been a long day, obviously, and I was gripped with a fear I'd never known before, and it was the fear of knowing that something was out there hunting me, and I couldn't do anything about it. And I couldn't go to sleep. I couldn't close my eyes. I stayed up all night, and had a really hard time sleeping for a long time. until I felt like God, and I went to God and prayed, and I was like, I need to sleep. I'm so tired, and I've got a whole year left to get through this. How am I supposed to get through it? And he said, go back to the one thing that you love, that you know me through, that we have a relationship through, and that was through worship. For me, I worship God through song, and so what I started doing at night, for every night for the next 12 months, I would put on my headphones and I would play worship music every single night, and so that's what I heard every single night for a whole year, was just worship songs, and that was the only way I could sleep. And honestly, for the next several years, when I came back, that was the only way I could sleep. So that was the first part in my spiritual journey of going through a trial, but then learning to appreciate real worship. But then I was introduced, and God gave me the opportunity to share that love and that calling to the people in Afghanistan and to the soldiers I was stationed with. And it was about 6 months into our deployment, and I worked with a couple of radio station disc jockeys. They worked closely with the outpost, and I was responsible for working with them. And they had heard that I'd played this instrument called the guitar, and they wanted to know more about it. And so I played for them one day, and I didn't know this, but they had recorded me and then distributed it out on their local radio station. Well, word quickly got around to this local village that incredibly remote in the mountains, very limited exposure to the Western culture, and they wanted to know more about this guitar that I was playing. And they had given me a nickname called the Rababi, which in their culture they have a stringed instrument that's much like a steel guitar called the rabab, and Rababi means basically in their language guitar man. And so they had asked for me to meet with them and my commander. So my commander would go out and meet with the village and the village elders, and I would play for these villages. And then one by one, these local villagers would start to encounter me and engage me, and they would start to share a little bit of their culture and their music, and I would try to match theirs, because their music culture is a lot different than ours. And my first experience was a local villager that was friendly to American forces. He a great singer and wanted to try singing a traditional Afghani Pashtun song while I was playing guitar, and a lot of people heard that. People recorded it on their cameras and phones and things like that, and word got around. And then I got invited to play with a local Afghan band at a party with the local police there. It was a big feast. They killed a lot of goats, and we ate goats and this thing called flatbread. Anyway, it was a lot of fun, but God was using that to open a door, and really the out of all the tragedy that happened that deployment, out of all the trauma, the greatest thing that happened in that deployment was the last couple of months I was there. It was Christmas time, and word had gotten around. It had become habitual for me to go to these villages and find the musicians, and we would just start to jam and play and things like that. And they found out I was a Christian, and so that we would start to have that discussion. And I ended up having a really lengthy discussion with a local imam, and he had invited me. It was getting close to Christmas, and we had had these discussions. He had invited me to come to the local mosque and then put on basically a Christmas ensemble. And I looked at him and I said, you realize I'm going to be singing about Jesus? He was like, yes, but we've never heard that name sung here before. And the most incredible experience of that entire deployment, not just bringing American soldiers and local villagers that had again limited exposure to the Western culture together and to try to rebuild that region, but to be able to sing and say the name of Jesus Christ in a place that had probably never heard that name before, in in history was amazing to be a part of. And it left me wanting more of that. When I came back to the States, I wanted to go back, and I didn't really know what God's plan was for my life. And so I just immersed myself after that into trying to increase my responsibility and leading worship in a local church. And I did deploy again, and I led worship at a local chapel at this base that I was stationed at in Afghanistan. And God just kind of led me through these cycles of growth, and then being assigned a team to take a part in leadership, and that happened for several years. But ultimately, when I think back on my life and what truly inspired me to get into worship leading, it honestly was that deployment and just being able to share the good news of the gospel in Jesus Christ through worship. So I'm married to my beautiful wife, Joanna. We've been married for over 8 years now. I've known her for about 12. We met in college, and kind of a serendipitous moment where we met at an amusement park randomly. She went to a different college than I did, and she just was on fire for God, and she had a passion for ministry and for Christ, and that was something that I hadn't seen. Even though I went to a Christian college, I hadn't seen a passion like that where I was at, and so I was just attracted to it. And then 4 years later, we both graduate, and she was a couple years ahead of me, so she graduated ahead of me. But then we get married, and then started my career in the active duty military. I have 2 kids. The first one is my firstborn is Katya Claire. She was born in August of 2013. A very significant moment for me because she was my firstborn. She was born on August 9th, and then on August 13th, I got on a plane to Afghanistan. So special because it was my first child, but then also a significant trial that I had to go to, because then I had to say goodbye to my firstborn child 4 days later. A couple years go by, and last year in March of 2016, my wife gave birth to our latest addition, Cohen Ray. And he's 17 months old now, and almost as big as my 4-year-old Katya. And he's into everything, but he loves cars and tractors and everything a little boy normally loves. But I love them both. We have a great family. So.